I hadn't even set my suitcase down when the phone rang. I was still wearing my coat, standing in the dark with only a single light on. I'd been gone for 2 weeks taking care of my sister out in Montana, but the moment I pushed the door open, Atlanta still smelled like home. The dust on the windowsill, the hum of the refrigerator, everything was exactly as I left it. Then, the phone rang. Before I even looked at the screen, my chest tightened. My name is Lois Willow. I'm 58 years old, and I was born and raised just a few blocks from where I was standing that night. If there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's this. A phone call at the wrong time rarely brings good news. It was Alton. I almost let it go to voicemail. He and I never talked much. We were polite around the holidays, but we kept our distance the rest of the year. But something in my gut told me to pick up. "Lois," he said. His voice was completely flat, completely devoid of concern. He sounded like a man reading off a grocery list. "You might want to go look for your unstable daughter. She's been missing for 10 days. I stood there in my coat, my keys still gripped in my hand. For a second, the words didn't make any sense. Unstable, missing, 10 days. "Unstable?" I said. "Alton, what are you talking about? Where is she?" "I don't know, Lois. She's been acting erratic for a while now. You know how she gets when she has one of her episodes. I didn't know how she got. My daughter hadn't had an erratic day in her entire life. She called me every single Sunday. She sent me pictures of her garden. Just 2 weeks ago, she was laughing uncontrollably over the phone about a minor mistake she made at work. Did you call the police?" I asked him. My voice sounded incredibly steady, much steadier than I actually felt. There was a pause on the other end. It wasn't a pause of grief. It was a calculated pause. "She's not my problem anymore," he said. I let that sentence hang in the air for a moment. I needed to replay it in my own mind to fully believe a husband could actually say that about his wife. "She's not your problem," I repeated slowly, letting him hear just how ridiculous it sounded. "Look, I have things to take care of," he said, as if I were asking him to run an errand. "I just figured you'd want to know, so I called. I wanted to ask him what could possibly be more important than his wife being missing for 10 days. I wanted to ask why I was hearing about this on day 10 instead of day 1. But at 58, I've learned when to push and when to just watch quietly. Something in his tone, that boredom, that impatience, like I was just an inconvenience, told me now was not the time to press him. "I'll handle it," I said, and hung up before he could say another word. After I hung up, I stood in my living room for a long time. My coat was still on, my suitcase was still by the door, and the house was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. That word he used kept looping in my head. Unstable. It sounded rehearsed, like a pre-packaged answer ready for anyone who dared to ask questions. Before we go any further, if you're watching this, please drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from tonight. I want to know who is walking through this with me, because things are about to get very heavy. My daughter was not unstable. She was careful, methodical, the kind of woman who color-coded her calendar and called you if she was going to be 10 minutes late. A man who had been married to her for 4 years couldn't just decide on a whim, during a flat phone call, that finding her wasn't his problem. There was something wrong with the way he spoke. No fear, no regret, just a sense of absolute finality. It left a sickening feeling in my stomach, even if I couldn't explain why yet. I didn't call the police first. I called my brother, Garrison. He picked up on the second ring. Before he could even finish saying my name, I told him the only thing that mattered. Something happened to Delphine, and I don't think anyone is actually looking for her. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago, replaying every word Alton said until they lost all meaning. By morning, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to rely on him to take responsibility for my daughter. I drove straight to her street. When I pulled up, Mrs. Yancey next door was outside watering her plants. She spoke before I even had a chance to get out of the car. "I saw them arguing," she said, leaning toward my window. "It was bad. Delphine walked out with a bag, got into a car, and drove off. I figured she just needed to clear her head." "How many days ago was that?" I asked. "Almost 2 weeks now, I'd say." 2 weeks, not 10 days. That discrepancy made my stomach drop, but I kept my face blank. I thanked her, and before I could let myself overthink it, I drove straight to the police station. The detective who came out to meet me introduced himself as Detective Holloway. From the moment we shook hands, I could tell he had already made up his mind about my visit before I even opened my mouth. "Ma'am, I understand your concern. he said, sliding a folder across his desk that he hadn't even bothered to look through. But your daughter is an adult. She left on her own accord, and a witness confirmed it. There's no law against an adult woman choosing not to check in with people. It's been 10 days, Detective. No calls, no texts, not even to her own mother. People do go quiet after a bad fight, but sometimes it means something went wrong. He spoke gently, but he left absolutely no room for negotiation. Unless there is evidence of foul play or an abduction, we don't open investigations into missing adults. Right now, all I have is an argument with an eyewitness and a woman who walked out on her own terms. That's not a case, that's a marriage issue. I wanted to shake him. I wanted to tell him he didn't know my daughter, that she had never gone 10 days without calling me in her entire life, fight or no fight. But I knew that making a scene at a police station just gets you labeled as difficult without getting you any help. So I nodded, thanked him for his time, slipped his business card into my purse, and left empty-handed. Alton called me that night, and this time his voice had softened, sounding almost believable. "I'm just so worried, Lois," he said. "I haven't been sleeping. I keep staring at my phone." I didn't say anything for a moment. I just listened to how guarded his voice was now, a complete contrast to the flat, bored tone from that first call. A man doesn't suddenly find his concern days later. He only puts on a performance when he realizes people are watching. "I'm sure she'll turn up," he added. But beneath those words there was something I couldn't quite name yet. Something that didn't fit a man whose wife was truly missing. I hung up, and that feeling stayed with me. I thought about calling Delphine's job, her friends, or anyone else who might have heard from her. I was reaching for my phone to start dialing when it rang in my hand. Garrison's name lit up the screen. "Lois," he said, his voice tight with a familiar restraint, the tone he used only when things were wrong. "If you're free, I need to see you tonight." "What is it?" "I can't say over the phone," he said. I found something. I'll come to you." I told him to come right over, and then I sat by the window until his headlights turned down my street. My tea went cold beside me for the second time in 2 days. Garrison didn't sit down when he walked in. He stood by my kitchen counter with his jacket still on, looking like a man who hadn't decided if he was staying. "I want to say this the right way," he began, "so you understand exactly what this is and what it isn't. Lois, this isn't an official department case. I don't have jurisdiction here. There's no file, nothing official. What I'm about to tell you is what I found on my own time, calling in favors I probably shouldn't be calling in as a detective. I'm telling you this as your brother, not an officer." I nodded slowly. I understood he was protecting himself, his job, and keeping me from building up hope on something that wasn't a formal case yet. "All right," I said, "talk to me as my brother." He pulled out a chair and sat opposite me. From the way he sank into it, I could tell that whatever he was about to say had been weighing heavily on him long before he walked through my door. "First thing," he said, "Alton and his father, the way they've been acting since this happened isn't right. I've dealt with enough worried families to know what real panic looks like. What I'm seeing from those two isn't panic. It's too smooth. It's too rehearsed." "He was different on the phone last night," I said. "Softer, practiced." "Exactly my point." Garrison clenched his jaw. "Second thing, it took me most of yesterday, but I finally got a woman who used to work with Delphine to talk. She told me Delphine showed up to work one day a few months ago with bruises on her wrists. She wore long sleeves for a week straight after that and refused to talk about it. When anyone asked, she brushed it off, saying she was just being clumsy." My heart sank. For a second, I couldn't find any words. My daughter had never mentioned any bruises, any long sleeves, or any silence to me. "Why didn't she tell me?" I asked, more to myself than to him. "Because she probably didn't want you to worry, Lois. That's what women do, especially the women in our family." He rubbed his chin, looking unsure for the first time all night. "There's one more thing, but I want to be straight with you. It's just a feeling, nothing I can prove." I looked at a post on her social media page talking about needing space and starting fresh, but something about it felt off to me, the phrasing. Maybe I'm just seeing things that aren't there. I don't want to make something out of nothing. "What do you mean by off?" "I can't put my finger on it. Just years of reading people telling me when a text doesn't match the voice." He gave a slight shake of his head, as if he didn't entirely trust this last bit of instinct himself. "I'm telling you anyway because I'd rather you know and have us figure out what it means later than keep it from you and realize I was wrong to hide it." I sat there, processing everything he had given me. The performance, the bruises, and this final lead he wasn't even sure about. I could feel the narrative I had been trying to convince myself of, that she just left, that she needed space, that she'd come back on her own, crumbling. There wasn't much ground left for that story to stand on. "What do we do?" I asked him. "We do nothing right now," Garrison said. "It's not time yet. If they catch wind that we're looking at them for even a second, whatever they're hiding goes deeper or worse. Lois, right now I need you to be a grieving mother, not a suspicious one." I looked at him for a long time. I felt something cold and steady settle in my chest, replacing the panic that had been there all week. "Then I'll watch," I said. "I'll wait, but I won't wait long." 2 days later, I showed up at Alton's door with a casserole dish, just like any grieving mother-in-law would, chicken and rice still warm, wrapped in a dish towel I'd owned for 20 years. It gave me a reason to be there. It gave me a reason to linger. "You didn't have to do this," he said, opening the door wider than I expected. "I know I didn't." I walked right past him before he could decide whether to invite me in. But I couldn't just sit at home doing nothing. The house looked the same as it always did, except for the mail. There was a small stack of unopened letters sitting on the counter, looked like 3 or 4 days' worth. A man waiting for his wife to come home doesn't let the mail pile up like that. He checks every piece, hoping one of them is from her. "Are you holding up okay?" I asked, setting the dish down. "Getting by," he said without looking at me. He stared at the dish as if trying to decide if he was actually hungry. "Been better." I let the silence stretch for a bit, the way I used to do when Delphine was small. I wanted him to fill the quiet with the truth, not just what he thought I wanted to hear. Alton didn't fill the space. He walked over to the sink and rinsed out a glass that was already clean. "Have the police called you?" I asked. "Any updates?" "Nothing new." He set the glass down harder than he needed to. "They're treating it like she just walked off, like it's nothing." "But isn't that what you told me? That she was unstable?" He turned around, and for a split second, a look crossed his face that wasn't grief. It was closer to irritation. The kind of irritation a man gets when he's been asked the same question one too many times. "I already told you what I think, Lois." I nodded, letting my expression soften, letting him believe I was just a worried mother desperate for anything to make sense. I moved slowly through his living room, quietly taking in everything I could see. There was a jacket thrown over a chair that didn't belong to him, and a set of keys on the table that didn't match his truck. "Whose keys are those?" I asked, keeping my voice as casual as possible. "My dad's," he said, responding a little too quickly before catching himself. "He's been coming by to help out." "Help with what?" "Just things around the house. Repairs." He picked the keys up off the table and slipped them into a drawer out of sight, as if he never intended for them to be noticed in the first place. "He said he had someone look at a problem with the door for me. Nothing you need to worry about." A problem with the door. I didn't say anything right then. I kept my face soft and tired, just like a grieving mother should look. But deep inside, I became very still, very focused, the kind of quiet that comes right before the truth shows itself. "That's nice of him," I said instead. "Ambrose always did like to keep busy." "Yeah." Alton looked at me, his gaze lingering a beat too long, as if realizing he'd said more than he meant to. "You should get heading home, Lois. It's getting late." I let him walk me to the door, thanked him for his time, and drove 2 blocks away before pulling over. My hand stayed on the steering wheel as I turned that single phrase over and over in my head until it stopped sounding like an innocent piece of small talk. A problem with a door. The next morning I called my cousin Patrice. She still goes to the same church as Ambrose's family. She's the kind of woman who knows everyone's business, whether she means to or not. "Girl, I haven't seen you in forever," she said. I let her talk for a bit before steering the conversation exactly where I needed it to go. "Are you still close with the Norwoods?" I asked. "Ambrose and his folks?" "Nobody gets close to Ambrose." Something in her tone shifted, becoming guarded in a way I recognized. "Why are you asking about him?" I almost told her everything right then. The words were right on the tip of my tongue. The door, the keys, the way Alton's face changed when he mentioned his father's name. But something pulled me back, an old instinct that told me the fewer people involved in this, the safer it would be. "Just making conversation," I lied. "That man has been spending a lot of time helping Alton out since Delphine's been gone." Patrice laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. "That man doesn't help anyone without getting something in return. Do you remember what he did to his own sister?" Or I guess it was his cousin. Honestly, it was so long ago, but everyone tells the same version of the story. Tell me the version you heard. Supposedly, he convinced her to sign the deed of her house over to him for estate planning, some nonsense like that. Told her it would save her on taxes later on. The way I heard it, she ended up having to rent a room from her own brother before she passed, and he sold the house within a year. Patrice sighed. It's just one of those things people whisper about at church every now and then, not too loud, because you know how people get about repeating things they can't prove. There was a nephew, too, something about a business deal gone bad where only the nephew took the hit. I don't know the specifics on that one, just the rumors. I sat in silence for a long time, watching my knuckles turn white against the phone. He's always been that way, from what I gather, Patrice continued, completely missing my silence. He can be charming right to your face like nothing ever happened. He could sell water to a fish. But that's just my take on him. I'm just saying after you shake hands with the man, you better check your pockets. You know what I mean? I know exactly what you mean, I said quietly. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing important, church folks and grandchildren, and I let her think the conversation had ended right where she expected it to. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, my tea going cold yet again, just like every other day that week. I thought to myself that a man with a past like that doesn't just go fix a door out of the goodness of his heart. I called Garrison that night and told him about the mail, the keys, and finally what Patrice had said about Ambrose, adding that most of it was church gossip and old stories no one could swear to in a courtroom. Garrison went quiet on the other end. It wasn't the silence of a man hearing something like this for the first time. It was the silence of a man deciding how much he was ready to say. "Garrison," I said, "you still there?" "I'm here." His voice changed, becoming guarded just like Patrice's. "Lois, I need you to tell me if he ever did anything with Delphine's property. Anything involving paperwork, refinancing, anything like that?" A chill went through my stomach at the question, not just because I didn't have an answer, but because Garrison wouldn't be asking unless he already suspected one. "Why?" I asked him. "What do you know about Ambrose that you haven't told me?" He didn't answer right away. In the silence that stretched between us, I understood that things had shifted. Ambrose Norwood wasn't just a name Patrice had warned me about anymore, an old story that couldn't be proven. He was someone Garrison already had his eye on. 2 nights later, Garrison came over much later than usual. Before he even spoke, I knew that whatever he had found, it must have taken him a few sleepless nights to get it. "Before I tell you this, I need you to understand one thing," he said, standing in the doorway without coming in. "What I'm doing right now, looking through property records on my own time and asking favors from people who owe me, none of this is official. If anything comes of this, it has to go through the proper channels. I need you to hear me on that." "I hear you," I said. "Now come inside and tell me." He sat down at my table and laid out a folder, but he didn't open it right away, as if he needed a moment before putting the words out into the air. "I started with the addresses I already knew were in his name," Garrison said. "His house, the church, the small office space he rents for his side business. I ran them through the county property records, looking for anything tied to the same registered agent or a couple of names he's used on paperwork before. It took me most of the week, honestly, cross-referencing names that didn't quite match until finally one did." He let out a slow breath. "Ambrose owns a piece of property under a name that isn't his. An LLC, paperwork filed about 2 years ago. On its own, there's nothing illegal about that. A lot of people hide behind corporate names for tax purposes. But it's a company with no website, no other assets, nothing attached to it except this one address." "Where is it?" "Not far, 20 minutes from Delphine's place, maybe less." He finally opened the folder and slid a printed photograph over to me. It was a small brick house, completely ordinary, with the shutters drawn tight on every single window. I drove by it myself, real slow, didn't stop. No cars in the driveway, no signs of anyone coming or going, just the kind of place you'd drive past 100 times and never look twice at. I stared at the photo for a long time, looking at how plain it was, the ordinary brick walls and the tightly shut blinds. It looked so unremarkable, and that somehow made it far more terrifying than if something had been visibly wrong. "Do you think she's in there?" I asked. "I don't know," Garrison said carefully, using the tone he always saved for times when he couldn't promise me what he couldn't prove. "I just know it's a property that shouldn't exist, tied to a man who shouldn't have a reason to hide it. That's all I know for sure." I thought about Delphine, really thought about her, not as a concept or a worry, but as my daughter, flesh and blood, sitting behind shutters just like the ones in that photograph. My hands went cold against my mug. "What do we do with this?" I asked. "Nothing yet. I can't take an LLC filing to a detective and call it proof. I need more before anyone official moves, bank statements, something linking Ambrose directly to activity there. That takes time." Time. The word sat heavy on my chest. "How much time?" I asked him. He didn't answer, and his silence said more than any words could. He left, and I sat up long past midnight, the image of that small brick house with the shut blinds and empty driveway burned into my mind. A feeling grew inside me. Every day I spent watching quietly was another day my daughter spent counting the hours in a place where nobody would ever look twice. I thought about the simple things a person needs to get through a day: food, water, a way to keep clean. I hoped that whoever had her there was providing at least that much, even if they cared about nothing else. Sitting there, I didn't know that behind those exact shutters, my daughter was doing the same thing I was, counting the hours, marking the days by the routine of footsteps outside the door, by the shift of light through the cracks in the curtains, holding on to every tiny detail as if it might matter later. Because a part of her, just like a part of me, understood that time was the one thing neither of us could afford to lose. I called Alton and told him I wanted to come sit with him for a bit, just the two of us. I didn't give a reason beyond a grieving woman needing company. He agreed easily enough. Maybe because saying no to the mother of your missing wife looks more suspicious than saying yes. I brought coffee this time instead of food. 2 cups, putting his down in front of him before sitting across the table, as still water. "I keep replaying that night in my head," I said softly, easing into it. "The night you two argued. I just want to understand what happened. A mother needs to know." "It wasn't anything big," Alton said, cupping his hands around the mug. "We had an argument and she walked out. I figured she'd cool off and come back like she always does." "What were you arguing about?" "Mostly money stuff, the usual." He shrugged. Too quickly, too much like a script he'd memorized. "She gets sensitive about the house, the accounts, things like that." I nodded slowly. I let the silence hang, because I've known for a long time that silence pulls more truth out of a person than any question ever could. "Where were you?" I asked, keeping my voice as gentle as possible. "The night she left, you were here all night, waiting for her to come back?" "All night, Lois." A flash of impatience crossed his face, gone as quickly as it came. "Why are you asking me all this?" "I'm just trying to understand her frame of mind before she left," I said. "The detective asked me similar things, and I'm just trying to square it in my head. I even called her job, asking if she said anything to anyone before she went missing." "What did they tell you?" "They said she texted them the week before asking for time off, said she needed a break." I watched him closely as I said it. The people there didn't think twice about it, figured she was just due for some rest. He seemed to relax at that, believing I was just confused, just collecting fragments for my own comfort rather than testing him for cracks. "It's fine," he said. "I get it. This is hard on everybody." We talked for another couple of minutes about nothing, letting him think the conversation had drifted to safe ground. Then, near the end, as he was walking me toward the front door, I brought up one little detail, like an afterthought. "It's funny," I said. "Mrs. Yancey next door told me she saw you drive out not long after Delphine left that night. I figured she must have mixed up the days." Alton's hand paused on the doorknob for a second, just 1 second too long. "She saw wrong," he said. "I told you, I was here all night." "Must have been," I said lightly, as if it didn't matter. "Old folks get the days mixed up all the time." I thanked him for the coffee, told him to call me if he heard anything, and walked out to my car at a normal pace, never looking back. Even though every part of me wanted to turn around, I didn't tell him that Mrs. Yancey had never said that to me. I had made it up on the spot. A little test, nothing more, just to see how a man telling the truth would react to an untruthful accusation. A man telling the truth corrects you without hesitation. But Alton paused. I sat in my car outside his house for a long time before starting the engine, replaying that pause over and over in my head. No matter how small, no matter how quiet, it was the first real crack I had found all on my own, without Garrison. I didn't call anyone that night. I kept my discovery strictly to myself. I held on to that secret, knowing with absolute certainty that whatever Alton was hiding, he wasn't nearly as clever as he thought he was. Garrison called before sunrise, and I knew right away this wasn't a conversation that could wait for a decent hour. "I need to show you something," he said. Can I come over right now? He was at my front door within 20 minutes. The way his hands moved as he pulled the documents from his folder was something I'd never seen from him before. It was as if the paper itself were burning his fingers. Remember how I told you I couldn't just take an LLC filing to anyone and call it proof? He said, standing over my table. That's still true, but I found something else. He placed a printed bank statement in front of me, a single line highlighted in bright yellow. This is Ambrose's personal account. No LLC, no hidden entities. His card, his name. He tapped the line. A cash withdrawal, 3 weeks ago, $400. The memo line just said, repairs. That doesn't prove anything, I said, even as my chest began to tighten. On its own, no. But I called an old contact who does contract work in town. I asked around quietly to see if anyone had heard about a cash job in that area around that time matching that exact amount. Garrison clenched his jaw. It took him a couple of days, but he found a handyman who remembered the job perfectly. The guy said it stuck with him because the man who paid him counted the bills twice before handing them over, like he didn't trust himself to get it right the first time. He said the man paid him to reinforce a door and a door frame at a rental house. Told him it was for a property he was getting ready to lease out. The handyman even had the carbon copy receipt left in his truck. The description he gave of Ambrose was a perfect match, right down to the specific watch he always wears. I sat there and let the image form in my mind, a door being reinforced. Not repaired, but made stronger, harder to break into, or harder to escape from. I thought about how little comfort might be left behind a door like that, and whether the people involved ever intended to provide anything beyond the absolute bare minimum needed to sustain a life. I hated myself a little because I didn't know the answer. He locked her in, I whispered, more to myself than to him. I can't say that for sure yet, Garrison said. His voice was cautious, but there was an urgency in it now that hadn't been there before. What I can say is that a man who claims he hasn't been near that property in years just paid cash in his own name to reinforce a door on the house there, and we have a receipt and a witness to place him there. That's not a stray lead anymore, Lois. That's a thread I can pull. Then pull it. I am. But I need to take this to Holloway. It can't just stay between us anymore. This kind of move needs a real detective's name on it, not mine. He carefully slid the papers back into the folder, treating them as if they were incredibly fragile. I'm taking this to him today. Let's see if it's enough to change his mind. I thought back to Detective Holloway's flat voice from my first visit, and the folder he hadn't even bothered to open. I wondered if $400, a signed receipt, and the memory of a stranger would be enough to alter the mind of a man who had already made up his decision. What if he still says it's not enough? I asked. Garrison didn't answer right away. In his silence, I heard something that scared me more than any definitive answer. The realization that even with a name, a receipt, and a reinforced door right in front of us, my daughter's safety still depended on whether the right person thought it was important enough to act. Then I keep digging, Garrison finally said, because a man like Ambrose doesn't make many mistakes, and he just made one. 2 nights later, Garrison laid everything out across my kitchen table. Every single piece. Like a man showing his hand, needing me to see all the cards at once. I want you to see the whole picture, he said. No more fragments. All of it. He started with refinance documents Delphine had signed nearly a year ago. Ambrose's name was woven into the fine print, clauses that gave him access to funds that should have belonged to her alone. Then came insurance policies quietly altered 4 months before she vanished, where Alton's name replaced her own trust. Next was the LLC, the property, the cash withdrawal, and the handyman's account of the reinforced door. I kept my hands flat on the table, letting the weight of it settle piece by piece until the details stopped feeling like isolated events and began to look like a long, calculated hand reaching for everything my daughter owned. They didn't just want her gone, I said. They wanted to take everything that belonged to her first. It looks that way, Garrison said. The refinancing before she went missing. The insurance changes before that. This wasn't panic. This was put into motion months before any argument ever happened. A cold stillness settled inside me, colder than fear, colder than grief. The kind of quiet that comes when a person stops reacting and starts deciding. What now? I asked. Now I take this to Holloway. Garrison began gathering the papers, squaring the edges with extreme care. Not as a favor this time, as evidence, A timeline of refinancing, insurance changes, and a cash payment tied to a property Ambrose claimed he hadn't touched in years. This is a financial case that any detective worth his badge has to look at. Is it enough? He paused, his hands resting on the folder. It's enough to make him listen differently than he did the first time. It's enough to open an official investigation, to get eyes on that property the right way, and maybe get warrants for financial records we couldn't touch on our own. His voice grew tight. But it's still not enough for a search warrant for the house itself. A judge needs more than suspicious money. We need something connecting Ambrose directly to a person there. Not just a payment, so we still wait. It's not the same kind of waiting as before. He looked at me firmly. It's Holloway's wait now, the official kind. It's completely different. I thought about that word. Waiting. How many times had I swallowed it since that first phone call? I thought about how many days had passed since anyone had seen her, except for the people holding her. I prayed that whatever they needed her alive for, they were at least keeping her functional. But by that table covered in financial documents, something changed inside me. I didn't feel like a mother simply hoping for good news anymore. Bring it to him tomorrow, I said, not next week, tomorrow. I already planned to, he met my gaze. I just needed to say it out loud. I am done being the person who only finds out what happened after the fact. Garrison studied me for a moment, as if seeing something new in his sister's face that hadn't been there the week before. All right, he said quietly. Tomorrow. He left with the folder tucked under his arm, and I sat alone at that table for a long time afterward. I stared at the empty space where all those documents had been spread out, understanding for the first time that whatever came next, I would never be the soft, waiting woman who answered that first phone call. Garrison called me later that evening, a note of hope in his voice that I hadn't heard through this entire ordeal. Holloway looked at it, he said. Really looked at it this time, read every page. He didn't promise me anything, but he didn't push it back across the desk without opening it either. Garrison paused, explaining that the timeline of the refinancing combined with the insurance changes was enough to justify a formal request for Ambrose's financial records. He said if that turns up anything further linking him to the property, the conversation about a search warrant changes completely. A wave of relief passed through me, faint and cautious, the kind that doesn't dare to settle in just yet. How long? I asked. Getting records takes time, even with a detective pushing for them. A few days, maybe longer. Garrison's voice turned serious. Lois, I need you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing for the next few days. Nothing more, nothing less. Let them believe you're still just a grieving mother waiting for news. I can do that. Honestly, I'd gotten good at it. Good at softening my face when I looked at Alton. Good at asking questions that sounded like worry instead of an investigation. Good at swallowing everything I knew just to let the grief show on the surface. There were nights I lay awake counting the days. How long had it been now? How long can a person's body hold out over a stretch of time like that? Wherever she was someone at least giving her water, letting her move, keeping her breathing steady until I could reach her? But Alton was starting to watch me differently. I noticed it 2 days later when I brought over another dish, finding another excuse to sit in his kitchen for a bit. He didn't relax around me the way he had during those first few visits. His eyes kept flicking toward the counter where I'd once seen his father's keys, as if checking to make sure nothing was out that shouldn't be. You've been coming by a lot lately, he said. The tone wasn't entirely a question. I worry about you, I said, and her. Funny. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. You never used to come around much before all this. Now you're here every few days asking things. She's my daughter, Alton. I know. His eyes didn't leave mine. I just think it's strange, is all. Suddenly so many questions, so much concern. I kept my face soft, tired, the picture of an anxious mother and nothing more, even as everything inside me went on high alert. I don't know what else you expect from me, I said. My daughter is missing. I thought you'd want me asking questions. I do. His voice stayed level, but there was something new underneath, something colder than the worry he'd been performing since the second phone call. I just wonder what you're really looking for sometimes, coming around here so much. I met his gaze just a second longer than was comfortable, refusing to be the first to look away. I'm looking for my daughter, I said. Just like I've been doing since the day you called me. He didn't answer right away. He just studied me the way a man looks at something he's no longer sure he understands. In that silence, I felt the shift between us. It was the unsaid acknowledgement of two people who each suspected the other knew far more than they were letting on. "You should get home," he finally said. "It's late." I left without rushing, keeping my expression completely clear of anything he could read. But I sat in my car outside his house for a long time, my hand steady on the wheel, knowing with absolute clarity that whatever careful distance I had been keeping, Alton was now keeping the exact same distance from me. When Garrison called, his voice carried a sharp edge I hadn't heard before. "I think Ambrose is spooked," he said, "and I don't like the reason why." "What happened?" "The handyman called my contact back today, nervous, asking why people were asking about a job he did months ago. My contact brushed it off, but the handyman still mentioned it to Ambrose. The guy's probably innocent, just making conversation, not realizing what he was stirring up." Garrison's heavy breath came through the line. "It means Ambrose knows someone is looking into that property. He might not know it's us specifically, but a man like that, as smart as he is, isn't going to just sit around." My heart sank at the words. "So he knows we're close. Close enough to make him worry. You need to be careful the next few days. If he's scared people make mistakes, but they also do things they wouldn't normally do." In that moment, I thought about Delphine behind whatever shut blinds she was trapped under. A chill took hold of me at the thought of what a panicked man like Ambrose might decide to do to protect himself. I prayed that whatever he did, he would at least keep providing her with water, keep her breathing steady, and not let fear make him reckless in the wrong direction. "What does Holloway say?" I asked, meaning about taking action on the property. "That's why I'm calling." Garrison's voice shifted, cautious, like he was choosing to hope but didn't want to promise too much. "The bank records came back. They show a transfer between Ambrose's account and a private contractor 2 weeks before that cash withdrawal. It's not huge, but it establishes a pattern now, not just a one-time payment. Combined with the LLC, the timeline, all of it, Holloway thinks he has enough to go to a judge. Enough for a search warrant, enough to make a real push. He's drafting the application now. Could be tomorrow, could be a couple of days, depending on the judge's schedule." Garrison paused. "I wanted you to hear it from me before anyone else. We're close, Lois. Closer than we've been since that first phone call. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, letting myself feel something I hadn't allowed in weeks. It wasn't entirely hope, but it was close enough to make my hands shake against the phone. Sitting there, I didn't know that on the other side of town, Ambrose spent the evening pacing his own house, running through every thread that could trip him up, and that he made a call of his own. A call to ensure that door was locked differently, to minimize visits, to tighten every risk he could manage. And I didn't know that behind that reinforced door, my daughter felt the shift too. The footsteps were more frequent. The voices were kept lower, a new tightness in the air that told her, without a word being spoken, that something beyond those walls had changed. She didn't know what it was. She only knew that whatever was coming, she needed to be ready to move the second that door cracked even an inch wider than usual. From then on, she began watching the hinges, counting the seconds between the turn of the key and the push of the wood, filing away every detail like a woman building her own case from the inside, waiting for the one mistake that would give her the timing she needed. Neither of us knew that night just how close that moment really was. Late the next afternoon, Garrison came to my house. Before he even spoke, I could tell by the set of his shoulders that something had moved. "The judge signed off," he said, 2 hours ago. I stood there, letting those 4 words drop into my mind like something heavy and definitive. "The warrant," I said, "for the property. For the property." Garrison sat down opposite me. For the first time in weeks, I saw something resembling relief on his face, though it was mixed with something else, something more guarded. "Holloway is leading the team. The GBI is involved because of the financial crimes tied to the whole thing. A full team, done right, done legally." "And you?" "I'm not on the entry team, Lois. Can't be. I gave them everything I found, walked Holloway through every detail. But it's his case now. His and the department's. I'll be there, but on the perimeter, same as you." I nodded slowly, understanding what that meant. I knew the specific ache of feeling both relief and complete helplessness at the same time. Months of watching, collecting, staying quiet, pretending to be soft, and now, at the most critical moment, there was nothing left for me to do but wait. "When?" I asked. "Morning." Just as the sun comes up, it's the best chance to catch whoever is inside off guard. Garrison reached across the table and took my hand, a gesture he hadn't made since we were children. I need you to stay home tomorrow. Don't go near the property. Don't go near Alton's house. Let them handle this the right way. I understand. Do you? He studied me closely. Because I know you, Lois. I know what it costs you to sit still. He wasn't wrong. Every part of my body wanted to be there when that door opened, to see my daughter's face the exact second she stepped back into the light. But I'd learned enough over these weeks to know that wanting something doesn't make it wise. The best way to keep Delphine safe now was to let the people trained for it do their jobs. I'll stay here, I said. I'll wait. Garrison held my hand a moment longer, then stood up, bracing himself the way he always did before anything difficult. Shoulders straight, a man ready to carry a weight. I'll call you the second I know anything, he said. Not a second later. After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen until late into the night. The silence around the house felt exactly like it did the night this all started. The phone sat in my lap, its screen dark and quiet no matter how long I stared at it. I thought back over every day since that first call. The casseroles, the quiet testing, the door I'd pushed with my own lies, the stack of papers that had been spread across this very table. It all led to this specific quiet, a stillness that felt heavier than any of the running around I'd done to get here. I thought about how many mornings she had woken up in that place, and I made a promise to myself that no matter what state I found her in tomorrow, weak, hurt, or terrified, she would see nothing but relief on my face. In that quiet, I thought about Delphine too. Not the image of her frightened that had filled my head the first few days, but the version Garrison had pieced together through timelines and testimonies, the person who might end up helping build the very case that sets her free. That thought did more to settle my mind than anything else that night. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat by the window, watching the dark sky, waiting for the first sign of morning light, knowing that somewhere in this city, a door that had been shut for far too long was finally going to be opened. Just after 7 in the morning, the phone rang. I had it in my hand before the first ring could even finish. We have her. Garrison's voice cracked on the words, a catch in his throat I'd never heard before. Lois, she's alive. She's weak, but she's alive. I don't remember grabbing my keys, or the drive itself. I only remember standing on a quiet street 20 minutes away from my daughter's house, staring at that small brick home with the shutters still drawn tight. Police cruisers were parked angled across the yard. An ambulance was backed into the driveway. I understood immediately why nobody would ever look twice at the place. It looked completely unremarkable. It looked like every other house on the block. Plain, forgettable, an address where a person's eyes would slide right past without stopping. Garrison came to get me himself, walking me past the police line and straight to the back doors of the ambulance. My daughter was sitting there, wrapped in a blanket, thinner than I'd ever seen her, blinking against the morning light like she hadn't seen it properly in weeks. A paramedic was kneeling beside her, checking an IV line already set in her arm, speaking quietly about hydration and how severe her dehydration was, explaining that they would introduce food slowly once they got her to the hospital, being careful with what her system could handle. Mom, just that one word broke through everything I'd been holding together since the day of that phone call. I don't remember crossing those last few feet between us. I only remember her arms around my neck, thin and trembling, and the complete collapse of my own performance, the one I'd carried through every dish delivered, every quiet lie told, every night spent pretending I wasn't watching. It all dissolved right there. I'm here, I told her over and over into her hair. I'm here, baby, I'm here. It wasn't long before the paramedics moved her to the hospital, an officer gently explaining that a full statement would have to wait until she'd been properly checked out. She was too weak, too dehydrated to do much beyond the fragments she could offer right then. I caught every word she managed to say before they closed the ambulance doors. Footsteps, the sound of locks. That was all she could give that morning, but it was enough. She didn't tell me more until 2 days later, once the color began returning to her face and the IV lines were taken out of her arm. Slowly, a little at a time, like a person handing over something fragile, unsure if it was safe to let go yet. A man came once, she said on the second day, staring at her hands, to fix something with the door. I heard him talking about the frame, the hinges. The day after that, she said more. A voice she recognized as Ambrose's from beyond a wall, a pattern of footsteps she'd learned to read like a clock. Small graces she hadn't expected, meals left without a word. Water she'd learned to ration herself, just in case a day came when nobody brought any. On the third day, an investigator came to her room, gentle and patient. Only then did she put it all in order. The voices, the conversations, the handyman's exact words about the frame and the work, matching piece by piece with what Garrison had already found, turning suspicion into solid evidence in real time. On that first morning at the property raid, I heard raised voices behind me and turned to see Alton being led out in handcuffs. His face looked pale and slack, completely unlike the flat, irritated man who had called me that first night. Ambrose came out behind him, saying something to the officers about a misunderstanding. His voice was still trying to carry that charm Patrice had warned me about, though nobody around him seemed to be buying it anymore. "Kidnapping," an officer said plainly to another, his voice carrying easily over to where we stood. I held my daughter's hand through all of it. Through that first morning, through the days in the hospital as her voice and her details and her strength slowly came back, right up until the strange, disorienting relief of watching the people who took her finally lose control of the story they'd spent months weaving. "It's over," I whispered to her that first morning, and every day after. "It's over now." But even as I said it, a part of me understood that this was only the beginning of what came next. Delphine moved back in with me 2 weeks after leaving the hospital. The house that had felt so empty the night of that first phone call was full again, filled in a way I hadn't dared to picture. On a Tuesday morning, the district attorney's office called while Delphine was still asleep in her old room. I sat at the kitchen table, the exact same table where Garrison had spread those documents out, listening to a woman explain, in careful, deliberate language, what charges were being filed alongside the kidnapping. Fraudulent theft, grand larceny, all tied directly to the refinancing and the accounts Ambrose moved her funds through. "We're going to need her involved for the civil side eventually," the woman said, "to recover the property, to recover the money. That process moves separately from the criminal case." She mentioned one more thing before hanging up. The timeline Alton had provided himself never matched up from the start, his claim of 10 days against the neighbor's account of nearly 2 weeks. That small lie would be one of the first holes the prosecution intended to tear through at trial. Along with it, she said, would be the bruise co-workers had noticed months ago, and a hospital visit Delphine had never mentioned to anyone. The state intended to use it all to show a pattern of prolonged abuse long before any kidnapping took place. I wrote it all down, exactly like a grocery list, careful and clear, so I could give it to Delphine exactly as it was when she was ready to hear it. She walked into the kitchen not long after I hung up, her movements still slower than they used to be, flinching on some mornings at sounds that shouldn't have startled her. "Was that about the case?" she asked. "Yes." I placed my notes in front of her, letting her read them at her own pace. "They're charging them with the financial crimes too, not just what they did to you." She read through the notes twice. Very quiet. I watched something harden in her expression that I hadn't seen there the days before, something closer to resolve than fear. "Good," she said. "I want it all back, every single cent they took. You'll have help with that. Lawyers for the civil side, separate from the criminal case. Will you help me with it?" "Every step," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." She nodded, then sat in silence for a long time, slowly turning her mug in her hands, clearly working through something in her own mind before she spoke again. "Mom, I've been thinking about something," she said. "Those weeks I was kept there, I kept picturing you here in the house, not knowing anything, just waiting and worrying. The thought of you suffering because you were in the dark made it harder." She looked up at me. "But Garrison told me something, said you knew things, said you were watching them the whole time without telling me you suspected anything, without letting on to anyone. I keep wondering what it felt like to carry that alone." I set my own mug down, considering how to answer her honestly. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done," I said. Sitting across from that man, bringing him meals, asking light questions while every part of my body was screaming. But if I'd shown a crack, if they'd suspected for a second that I knew anything, I don't want to think about what they would have done to keep it quiet, what they would have done to you. Delphine was quiet for a moment, letting the words settle. "I understand," she whispered, "but it doesn't mean it doesn't feel strange, knowing how close you were and me not knowing. I know, baby, I know it does." She reached out and took my hand, her grip much firmer than it had been the day I found her. "How did you know?" she pressed. Everyone else was ready to believe I just walked away. I let the silence stretch for a long moment, feeling the weight of the question. "Because I know you," I said. "A mother knows when something is wrong, even when the whole world is telling her otherwise." The morning of the civil judgment, the courthouse hallways were cold. The kind of cold that has nothing to do with the weather outside. Delphine sat on that hard wooden bench, her hand steady in mine, steadier than it had been in months. When the lawyer came out to tell us the judgment had passed, that every dollar had been traced back to Ambrose's accounts and ordered returned, that the deed to the property was registered entirely back in her name, and the refinancing undone as if it had never happened, she didn't cry the way I thought she might. She just closed her eyes for a moment, letting out a long, slow breath, like she was dropping something she'd been carrying without realizing how heavy it was. "It's really mine again," she said. "It was always yours," I told her. "They just made you forget it for a little while." The criminal trial still waits for us. The court dates are set for both Alton and Ambrose. If the evidence holds the way Garrison believes it will, the weight of the kidnapping charge is enough to keep them away for a long time. That's a fight for another season. Today was for this: the money, the property, the paper proof that what they stole had a name, and that name was hers. We drove home afterward, and Delphine had me take the long way past her old house, the one she'd shared with Alton. It sat empty now under a bank of clouds, looking softer against the street than it had the first day I'd knocked on the door with a casserole dish. She didn't get out of the car. She just stared at it through the glass for a long time. "I used to wonder if something was wrong with me," she said quietly. "The way he talked about me to people sometimes behind my back, calling me unstable. To be honest, I started to believe it a little. Started to wonder if I really was just overthinking things, or too sensitive, or whatever else." "You were never any of those things," I said. "You just married a man who needed you to doubt yourself more than he needed you to believe him." She nodded slowly, letting the words rest in a place where they could finally take root. "I don't think I'm that woman anymore," she said. "The one everyone was ready to believe just got lost." "You aren't her," I said. "You never were." We drove the rest of the way home in a quiet that didn't feel heavy anymore, the kind of quiet two people can just sit in without needing to fill it with anything at all. That night, after Delphine went to bed, I sat by the window just like I'd done so many nights before, only this time, the silence in the house didn't ache the way it used to. I thought back to that first phone call. Alton's flat voice, the words meant to make my daughter's disappearance sound like an ordinary thing, a choice she'd made on her own. I thought about every quiet lie told just to keep myself close enough to watch. Every casserole, every soft question with an edge hidden inside it. For years I've been the kind of woman people look past, quiet, still, easy to dismiss. As it turns out, that's exactly the kind of woman they should have been afraid of all along. I wasn't the one who left, and I wasn't the one who stayed quiet when it mattered. I was the one who found the truth. Before I could even get a clear look at her face, the pain hit me. It was a sharp, sudden wrenching just below my waist, right where they'd cut me open 8 weeks ago. I had to grip the hallway handrail just to keep my balance, and that was the exact moment I heard her voice behind me. It was sugary sweet and entirely too slow, wrapped in the kind of tone that meant she was settling in to enjoy herself. "Well, look who it is. My name is Vereen Prather." I had only come to Grady Memorial Hospital that morning for a routine follow-up scan, the kind of post-op appointment meant to confirm that everything inside you is healing the way it's supposed to. I wasn't thinking about anyone from my past life. I wasn't thinking about her at all. But some people have a gift for finding you exactly when you are at your most defenseless. And when it came to me, Ozetta Windbush had always possessed that gift. She stood there in a crisp, peach-colored blazer, holding her handbag in front of her like a shield. She was smiling the kind of smile you wear when you've already decided you've won. "I almost didn't recognize you," she said. "You've lost so much weight." I didn't take the bait. I'd learned a long time ago that Ozetta's compliments were just insults dressed in Sunday clothes. "I saw Roscoe last week," she continued, entirely untroubled by my silence. "He is absolutely glowing, Vereen. I mean, truly, the change that little baby girl has brought over that man is something I never thought I'd see. And your sister?" She paused there, letting the word linger. "Clarissa just lights up a room the second she walks in now. It's like she was always meant to be the one." Ozetta kept right on talking, barely pausing to catch her breath. "You know, I used to worry about Roscoe so much. All those years he spent with you, it just always felt like something was missing. Now I look at him, and I think, This is the life he was always supposed to have. She let out a soft laugh that was more air than sound. I probably shouldn't say it, but just between us, the lawyers finally got his father's estate completely sorted out. The moment that baby arrived, everything opened up for him. It's like the universe was just waiting for her to get here. I noted that piece of information away. Ozetta never explained herself unless she was proud of something, and she was far too smug right now to realize she was telling me more than she intended. She tilted her head, waiting to watch my face crumble. That was why she was here. Not for the hallway, not for a chance meeting. She wanted to see the knife slip in. I let the silence sit in the air for a second, a little longer than was comfortable, before I said the only thing that felt worth saying. Is that what you believe? It wasn't loud, it wasn't mean, but something in her eyes flickered for a fraction of a second, like a woman who expected to find tears and hit a locked door instead. What did you say? She asked. Nothing, I said. Have a good afternoon, Ozetta. She opened her mouth to push further, as if my lack of a reaction insulted her more than any shout could have. But before she could get the next word out, my phone buzzed against my palm. I glanced down, keeping it low enough so she couldn't see the screen. A single line from Emmett. I'm here, 2 minutes. Ozetta was still talking, something about grandbabies, legacy, and how good it felt to finally have what she always wanted. But I've stopped listening. I kept my eyes on the elevators at the end of the hall, waiting for the doors to slide apart. When they did, Emmett stepped out, his eyes scanning the corridor before he even located me. He didn't rush his steps. That was the thing about Emmett. He never hurried, even when it mattered most. At the sound of his footsteps, Ozetta turned around. The second she recognized him, her entire posture softened. Emmett Rucker, she said, sounding like she was handing him a gift just by using his name. Look at you. Roscoe didn't tell me you'd be here. He doesn't know, Emmett said. Something in his voice made her blink, but she recovered quickly, folding the slight awkwardness into another smile. Well, good to see you regardless. I was just telling Vereen how wonderful things are going for Roscoe. I caught some of it, Emmett said, standing perfectly still. Ozetta's smile stayed fixed, but the corners of her mouth had gone tight. The kind of tight that happens when a person senses the ground shifting before they can see the reason why. I hope you caught the good part. My son finally has everything he deserves. That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. She let out a short, airy laugh, trying to keep the conversation light. Emmett, you sound so serious. Is everything okay? No, ma'am, I don't believe it is. The hallway seemed to quiet down, even though nothing around us actually changed. The same nurses pushed carts past, the same pages crackled over the intercom somewhere distant. But I felt it, the way the air in a room tightens right before the weather truly breaks. I have reason to believe, Emmett said, measuring out each word, that little girl isn't Roscoe's. Ozetta's face didn't drop right away. It did something stranger. It went entirely blank, like a screen going white for a split second before showing you something you didn't want to see. Excuse me, she said. Some things Roscoe told me a few weeks ago didn't sit right with me. Emmett's voice carried no heat, no cruelty, just a detail about a timeline he'd passed over quickly. I've gone over it enough times in my own head that I can't keep quiet about it anymore. Ozetta's hand lifted toward her collarbone, stopping short in the air. To suggest something like that to your own friend, to my son, that is a terrible thing to say. I know what this looks like. Why would you even... Because you've spent the last year treating her like she was the one who failed this family. He gave a slight nod toward me, though his eyes never left Ozetta's. And whatever else comes out of this, she never lied to him once. Ozetta opened her mouth and closed it again. For the first time since I'd known her, Ozetta Windbush was looking for a response and finding absolutely nothing. Say that again, she whispered. Emmett met her gaze. I don't believe that child belongs to Roscoe, and I don't think it's a coincidence that your husband's trust unfroze the minute she was born. Nobody moved. A cart clicked past somewhere behind us, completely unaware, and an overhead light flickered once before settling. Ozetta's hand finally reached her collarbone, staying there as if she needed to hold on to something solid. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. For the first time in a year, I let out a slow, quiet breath, a tiny exhale, careful not to let it show on my face. Ozetta kept her eyes on Emmett, waiting for him to take it back. He didn't. After that, Ozetta didn't want to be left alone. Her tone was less of an invitation and more of a command. "Come to the house, both of you. I need somewhere to sit that isn't this hallway." Emmett looked at me, leaving the choice in my hands. Before I could fully think through why, I agreed. The house hadn't changed at all. The same brick facade, the same perfectly trimmed hedges, the same gold-framed family photos lining the staircase wall like a gallery of a family that had never let itself down. Ozetta and Emmett went straight to the kitchen, her voice already starting up again, already trying to find a solid footing. I stayed back in the foyer. I hadn't stepped foot in this house in over a year, and standing here again brought things loose before I could stop them. I thought back to a dinner during my 7th year of marriage, when the good china had been brought out because Ozetta's sister was visiting from Savannah. I had made a pound cake. It was my grandmother's recipe, and I'd been proud of it. Silly proud. The way you get proud of small things when you're trying to fit into a place that constantly reminds you that you don't belong. Ozetta took one bite, then set her fork down. "It's fine," she said, using that tone that already decided it wasn't. Then, she turned to her sister, as if I weren't standing 3 feet away holding the cake knife. "Clarissa makes one exactly like her mother used to. Real butter. Not this shortening business." She looked at Roscoe then, not at me. He would be so much better off with someone who actually understands how to keep a kitchen. Roscoe hadn't said a thing. He just kept eating, letting the comment pass through him without leaving a mark. I remember thinking right then that his silence was its own kind of answer. It wasn't the only time. It became a pattern so slow I barely noticed it forming. Clarissa's birthday would be marked with a card and a check. Mine would pass with nothing until Roscoe reminded his mother a week late. Christmas photos where Clarissa stood right next to Ozetta center frame, while I stood on the edge smiling. Because that's what you do when you decide the cost of a smile is cheaper than the alternative. 7 years of tiny subtractions, each one small enough that I could always convince myself not to make something out of it. Roscoe saw it. I know he did, because some nights in the car on the way home he would go quiet, his jaw set like a man who wanted to say something and didn't. But wanting to say something and actually speaking are two different kinds of men, and Roscoe had always been the first kind. I was still caught in that memory when I noticed the staircase wall in front of me. The photo that used to sit right at eye level, a family gathering from 4 years ago, the one where I was standing next to Roscoe with my hand on his arm, was gone. In its place hung a different photo. Same gathering, same room, same tablecloth. I recognized the night, only I wasn't in it. Clarissa stood in the exact spot I used to occupy. Same placement, same angle, her hand resting on Roscoe's arm just like mine had. I stepped closer, checking the tiny date stamped in the corner, the way old film used to mark time. The date was months before the affair became public, months before any of us were supposed to know. I stood there for a long time looking at a photo that was telling me a story I'd never been told. I was still staring at the wall when I heard footsteps behind me. For a brief, hollow second, I thought it might be Clarissa herself, as if the house had summoned her right out of the frame. It was just Emmett coming to check on me. I stepped back from the wall before he could ask what I was looking at. "You okay?" he asked. "I will be." He didn't press. He just stood there for a second, giving me the space, and that silence was enough to let something else shake free. A memory of Clarissa I hadn't allowed myself to dwell on in years. It was early in my marriage, maybe 2 years in, when Clarissa called me crying because she couldn't make rent. Some apartment complex was threatening to lock her out if she didn't find $400 by Friday. I sent the money without asking Roscoe first because that's what you do for family. She promised to pay me back the next month. She never did. Not the next month, or the month after that. When I finally brought it up gently on the phone, she laughed like I'd told a bad joke. "Vereen, it's $400. You married into a family that owns half of Fulton County, and you're worrying about $400. Somehow, by the end of the call, I was the one apologizing for bringing it up. Before Roscoe, before all of this, there had been another boyfriend. A man named Desmond she'd seen quietly and sweetly for a few months until it came out that he had a fiancé 2 counties over. Clarissa swore up and down she hadn't known, that she'd been lied to just like everyone else. The family believed her because it was easier than the alternative. I believed her too back then. I wanted to. Looking back now, I wonder how many times I mistook her convenience for innocence. But it wasn't the money or Desmond I remembered best. It was a cookout at someone's house, everyone drinking and loose. I'd asked her, half joking, how she always managed to land on her feet no matter how big a mess she left behind. She smiled at me over the rim of her glass, easy and indifferent, like the question didn't require any real thought. "As long as you don't correct them," she'd said, "you'd be surprised what people are willing to believe." I'd laughed then. Everyone did. It sounded like nothing. A joke about small lies, about petty gossip, about letting people assume you were a different age or making a different salary without correcting them. I hadn't thought about that line in years. Standing in this hallway, staring at a photo with the wrong sister in it, the words didn't sound like a joke anymore. It sounded like a philosophy, a method, a lesson a woman learned a long time ago, that the truth only matters if someone bothers to look for it. And most people, especially the ones who love you, rarely look. I thought about the due date Ozetta had mentioned so proudly in the hospital hallway. I thought about how easily Clarissa had always let people believe whatever was easiest, whatever cost her the least. Standing there, I began to wonder how much of what I'd been told over the past year was true, and how much was just what Clarissa had let me believe. The affair coming to light hadn't happened with slammed doors and shouting in the driveway, the way I always pictured it would. It happened quietly, politely even, the way everything in this family did. A text message left on a laptop I caught a glimpse of by accident, a name I recognized instantly because it belonged to my own sister. I remember the specific quiet of that afternoon. I didn't cry right away. I just sat and read it twice, then a third time, waiting for my body to catch up to what my eyes already understood. When I finally called Roscoe, I didn't scream either. I only asked him one question. "How long?" He answered honestly, which somehow felt worse than if he'd lied. 4 months, he said. 4 months of dinners where he complimented my cooking. 4 months of nights where he slept beside me without a tremor in his voice. Ozetta found out 2 days later. I wasn't there for that conversation, but Roscoe told me afterward, sounding confused himself, that his mother hadn't been angry. She'd been relieved, like watching a long overdue repair finally get finished. In his own words, she'd told him that she always felt Clarissa understood the family in a way I never quite managed, and that maybe now things could finally be the way they were supposed to be. I turned that phrase over in my mind long after he said it. The way she understood the family, as if belonging were something that either lived in your blood or didn't, no matter how many holidays you hosted or birthdays you remembered. The divorce itself moved fast, faster than 7 years should take. In a beige lawyer's office, papers were passed back and forth across a table. Roscoe signed his name without looking me in the eye once. No fighting over furniture, no fighting over money. It felt sadder for how easy it was. Like the marriage had been quietly unstitched long before either of us actually said the word aloud, and we were just making the paperwork match the reality. At the very end, after the last name had been signed, Roscoe walked me out to my car in the parking garage. Neither of us spoke for the first minute. Then, just as I unlocked the door, he said the thing that stayed with me most through that entire year. "You were never going to give my mother what she wanted." I turned to look at him. The expression on his face when he said it wasn't mean. That was the strange part. He just looked tired, like a man laying down a weight he'd carried for years without complaint. I could have asked him what he meant. I could have pushed him for the explanation, made him say exactly what it was his mother wanted that I supposedly couldn't give. A part of me wanted to, but I didn't ask. I think, standing in that garage, I already understood that his answer wouldn't be about love or happiness, or even specifically about Clarissa. It would be about something colder than that, something that had been decided long before I ever stood in front of a preacher and gave him 7 years I didn't know I was wasting. I got in my car. He got in his. That was the last real conversation Roscoe Windbush and I ever had. I didn't know then just how much weight that single line actually carried. I went back to my apartment that night, tossing and turning, unable to sleep, until I finally let myself think about the folder. It had been sitting in the bottom drawer of my office desk for nearly 5 years, untouched since the divorce, tucked behind a stack of old tax documents I'd always intended to shred. I hadn't thought about it in ages, but standing in Ozetta's foyer earlier that day, hearing the word trust slip so easily from her mouth, a quiet space opened up inside me, like someone calling my name in a loud room. I remembered exactly how that folder came into my possession. It was early in the marriage, maybe a year and a half in, when Roscoe came home from his mother's house carrying a frustration he rarely showed. His father had been gone nearly 3 years by then, and the estate was still being sorted through layers of paperwork that seemed to grow rather than shrink. "My father set it up so nothing fully releases until there's an heir," he told me that night, tossing his keys onto the counter harder than necessary. "Until I have a child. Until then, it's just my mother and the lawyers holding the strings, handing things out to me like I'm 12 years old." I hadn't looked into the details. Not really. Not the way I would years later. I just knew that talking about money made him tight, the way it always did, and involving his mother's name made it worse. "She acts like she's protecting the family," he'd said. "She's just protecting her own say." I didn't ask too many questions. It wasn't my family's money, and Roscoe rarely wanted to spend much time talking about anything that made him feel small. But over the months that followed, I became the person who kept track of it all for him. The letters from the lawyers, the deadlines for responses, the pages of small print he didn't care to read twice. Sometimes he'd throw unopened envelopes at me, muttering that he'd deal with it later. And later usually meant never, unless I took care of it first. "Just make copies of whatever comes in," he told me one night, pushing a fresh stack across the kitchen table. "I don't trust my mother not to lose things and try to blame me for it down the road. At least if you file it, I have something to show." So I did what I'd grown used to doing, what was expected of me. I made copies at the library near our old apartment, put them in a folder I simply labeled Trust R, and tucked it into my desk drawer alongside the insurance papers and the mortgage documents. It was one of the quiet, invisible foundation pieces of a marriage we both thought would last forever. I never opened that folder again. Not once in the years that followed. It became like old furniture, present but unseen. When the divorce happened, in that beige lawyer's office, a lot of other things were divided and discussed and argued over. Nobody asked about an old folder of trust correspondence sitting in a drawer that both of them had forgotten about. I certainly didn't bring it up. Years later, sitting in my apartment, I opened that drawer and found it exactly where I'd left it. The edges were slightly yellowed, the label still clear in my own handwriting. Trust R. I hadn't stolen it. I hadn't even kept it on purpose. It just never got asked for, like so many small things from that marriage that were simply left behind. I'd let it sit there, just like I'd let a lot of unsaid words sit inside me for 7 years. But holding it now, after everything Ozetta had let slip in that hospital hallway, I understood for the first time that I wasn't just holding old papers. It was the beginning of every answer I still needed to find. I sat at my kitchen table with 2 things in front of me, the folder marked Trust R, and a piece of notebook paper I hadn't looked at in nearly a year. I'd written it down the night I heard it. Roscoe was out on the back porch thinking I was asleep. His voice was low, but not low enough. He was talking to someone about a due date that didn't add up, and the decision to just let it stand regardless. I hadn't understood the full weight of it then, not like I did now. But something in me knew it mattered enough that I needed to write the words down exactly as they were spoken, with the date at the top, a piece of evidence I didn't yet know I'd need. I hadn't touched that paper over the past year. I'd kept it hidden away with everything else I didn't know what to do with, out of sight, useless for anything other than knowing it existed. Now, setting it down next to the trust folder, I finally let myself think clearly about what I was holding. The written record was mine. It was something I'd overheard in my own home during my own marriage, a woman remembering words spoken under her own roof. There was nothing wrong with that, but the folder was different, and the longer I stared at it, the clearer that became. It wasn't marital property. It had never been mine, not really. It was confidential correspondence from the Windbush Family Trust, copied at Roscoe's request for convenience, never intended for me to keep after the marriage ended. Nobody had asked for it back, but that didn't make it mine. Sitting there, I knew exactly what that meant if this ever went beyond a confrontation in a hospital hallway. People with law degrees would ask why a woman with no claim to a trust had 5 years of private correspondence sitting in her desk without anyone asking for it back. That wasn't a good answer once real money and prominent family names got involved. I thought about shredding it. I even stood up, folder in hand, and walked halfway to the small shredder in the corner of my office before stopping. If I destroyed it now, I told myself, I was choosing convenience over the truth. And I'd already spent 7 years choosing convenience, smiling through dinners, swallowing insults, keeping my own worth tucked away just like this folder, without complaint. Instead of shredding it, I sat back down, the folder still in my hand. I forced myself to sit with the discomfort of not knowing what to do with it yet. And that was when the knock came. 3 sharp raps against the wood, not the soft, apologetic kind. I checked the time. It was past 9 at night, no phone call ahead of time, nobody I was expecting. I looked through the peephole and found Emmett standing there, breathing hard, looking like a man who had driven straight from somewhere without stopping to think it through. He held his phone out in one hand, as if it might slip away from him if he weren't careful. I opened the door slowly. "Emmett, it's late." "I know," he said. "I know it's late." His face didn't have its usual calm. Something had unsettled him, and Emmett didn't unsettle easily. "What is it?" He pushed the phone forward, the screen still bright, as if he needed me to see it before he could say anything else. "I think you need to look at this." I stepped back to let him in. Emmett didn't wait to be asked before sitting on the edge of the sofa, the phone still gripped tight in his hand like he hadn't decided whether to show it to me or protect me from it. "Before I give you this," he said, "I need you to know that something has been sitting with me for a long time, longer than it should have." I sat across from him, my hands folded in my lap, waiting. "Do you remember the 4th of July cookout at Ozetta's house the year before the divorce?" he asked. I did. I remembered most of Ozetta's gatherings the way you remember the weather. Unpleasant, predictable, something to be endured until it passed. "She asked you in front of everyone why you and Roscoe hadn't given her a grandchild yet," Emmett said. "She said something about time getting short, and you just smiled and said something polite, and everyone laughed like it was nothing." He paused. "I've thought about that day a lot more than you probably know." "Emmett, let me finish." His jaw was tight, a look I'd never seen on him before. Not in all the years I'd known him as Roscoe's steady, unbothered friend. "I've known that family since I was 19. I've sat at that woman's table more times than I can count. I've watched her look right through you like you were just a piece of furniture in a room she was proud of. And I never said a word, not once. Because Roscoe was my friend, and I told myself it wasn't my place." He looked down at his hands. "That day at the cookout was the first time I wanted to say something. But I didn't. I told myself the same thing I always told myself. It's not my place. It's not my business. If it really mattered to him, Roscoe would handle it." He gave a slow shake of his head. He never did. Not once. I didn't ask him why watching a friend's wife get minimized at a dinner table mattered so much to him. I think a part of me already knew the answer. The way you know a storm is coming before the sky actually changes color. And that part of me understood that neither of us needed to say that specific truth out loud tonight. "After the divorce, I stopped making excuses for staying quiet," he continued. "After everything that happened, watching what they left you to carry alone, it just didn't sit right with me anymore." He finally turned the phone toward me. "I've been keeping an eye out, not because I was looking for anything specific. I wanted to be ready if something ever went wrong. And tonight, going through some old messages, I found this." The screen showed a group chat I vaguely recognized. Cousins, family, friends, the kind of loose network people use to share good news. There was a message from Clarissa sent months ago, a photo of an ultrasound attached, a string of happy exclamation points announcing her due date to everyone at once. I stared at the timestamp first, then at the date itself. A strange feeling settled in my chest, arriving even before my brain finished the math. "Emmett," I said slowly, "when did you say the affair became public to the family? I mean, when did everyone actually find out?" He met my gaze, and I watched him step into the same unsettling realization where I was standing. "That's the thing," he said. "This message was sent before that." "Walk me through it again," I said slowly. Emmett set the phone down between us on the coffee table, the screen still resting on Clarissa's old message. He pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket, a plain, spiral-bound thing that made me realize just how long he'd truly been keeping track of these things in secret. "All right," he said, tapping the screenshot. "This message is the due date Clarissa gave the family. Everyone saw it. Nobody questioned it, because why would they, right? A standard pregnancy is about 40 weeks. You count back from that due date, and the conception happens roughly 9 months before the birth." I nodded slowly, feeling a tightness in my chest, the heavy weight that comes when you already know the answer but don't want it confirmed. "Now think about when the affair actually came to light," he said. "Not when you think it started, when people actually knew." I thought back to the laptop screen, the message I'd found. The 4 months Roscoe had admitted to when I asked him directly. "He told me 4 months," I said. "When I confronted him, he said it had been going on for 4 months. How long was that conversation before the final divorce papers were signed? A few months, maybe 10 weeks. Emmett was already writing, connecting the numbers I hadn't let myself connect yet because I was too afraid of where they would lead. So by his own admission, the affair started roughly 6 months before the divorce was final, he said. That's the earliest anyone can honestly place Roscoe and Clarissa together. Right. But this due date, he said, tapping the screen again, a bit harder this time. It pushes the conception date back to 9 months before the baby was born, and the baby arrived 3 months after the divorce. Hearing myself say the math out loud made it real. I needed to hear the words in the air to fully believe them. 9 months before the birth, with the baby arriving 3 months post-divorce. That means conception happened 6 months before the final paperwork was signed. Which is exactly when the affair supposedly started, Emmett said. Maybe even a little before. It's incredibly tight, but I admit, looking at the numbers alone, it's not technically impossible. It's not just the numbers, I said slowly. I hadn't told him this part yet. I wrote something down nearly a year ago. Roscoe was out on the back porch thinking I was asleep. He was talking to someone about a due date that didn't add up, and the decision to just let it stand regardless. I dated the paper that exact night. I still have it. Emmett froze. You never mentioned that. I didn't understand what I was hearing at the time. He set his pen down. This isn't just a tight timeline anymore. This is his own voice proving he knew before the ink on the divorce was even dry. You can argue math, but you can't argue a confession. I let that settle in for a long moment. It wasn't shock. It was a colder sensation. The confirmation of a suspicion I hadn't dared to name until now. There's one more thing, Emmett said, his voice dropping lower. Once we step into this, really step into it, there's no going back. Ozetta's world, Roscoe's, even Clarissa's. Once this stone starts rolling, it won't be quiet. He looked at me calmly, offering me a way out, a chance to leave the folder in the drawer, keep the notebook in his pocket, and let everything stay buried the way I'd buried so many things over the last 7 years. I didn't hesitate. Uncover it, I said. 2 days later, Emmett called. From the very first word, I could tell something had gone wrong. Roscoe knows I've been asking around. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table, the exact spot where we'd mapped out the numbers just 2 nights before. How? Marcus, he said, naming a mutual college friend who still ran in Roscoe's circles. I asked him a minor question about the timeline of when Roscoe and Clarissa went public. I didn't think much of it. I guess he brought it up to Roscoe like it was nothing. It's not nothing. No, Emmett said, it definitely isn't. He told me the rest slowly, as if he were still processing it himself. Roscoe had shown up at his apartment that morning without warning, much like Emmett had done at mine. Except Roscoe wasn't there to uncover anything. He was there to shut it down. He didn't even say hello, Emmett said. Just walked in and asked why I was digging into his personal life. I told him I wasn't digging, that I just asked Marcus a simple question. He didn't believe you. No, he said. Emmett paused, and I could hear him deciding how much of the exact language to repeat to me. He said he knew what I was really doing. Said I'd been looking at you for years, and that now that he was out of the picture, I finally had an excuse to get close. I felt my face grow hot. It wasn't entirely embarrassment. It was the sharp sting of hearing something intensely private used as a weapon by a man who had never tried to understand it. What did you say? I told him it wasn't about you or me. It was about a due date that didn't add up and a trust document that unfroze a little too perfectly. Emmett's voice hardened, the usual calm cracking at the edges. He didn't like that part. What did he say? He got in my face. He told me if I said a single word to his mother, just one word, he'd make sure everyone knew the real reason I was doing this. Make it about us, make it messy, and make it look like a jealous conspiracy rather than a search for the truth. Emmett let out a slow breath. He wanted to scare me off. Did it work? The line went quiet for so long I almost asked the question again. No, Emmett finally said. It didn't work, Vereen. I told him I didn't care what he said about me. I told him a man who is secure in the truth doesn't need to threaten his friends to keep it covered. His voice was steady now, steadier than I think he expected it to be. He didn't care for that answer. What did he do? He left, didn't say another word, just looked at me like he was trying to figure out if I was bluffing. Are you? No, Emmett said without a second thought. I'm not. After I hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand for a bit. I turned over what it meant that Roscoe hadn't come for me directly. Instead, he went after the only person standing with me. On a Thursday evening, Clarissa showed up at my apartment. No phone call ahead of time. She looked like she'd driven straight from something important, dressed in heels and a blazer. For once the baby had been left with someone else. I almost didn't open the door. A part of me had been waiting for this ever since Roscoe went to see Emmett. "Can I come in?" she asked, pushing past me before I could answer. I let the door shut behind her, making no move to offer her a seat. "I heard Roscoe went to see that friend of yours," she said, turning to face me in the living room as if she had every right to be standing there. "Emmett, right?" "You heard right. Vereen." She used my name softly, the way she used to when we were girls and she needed something from me. "Whatever this is, whatever you and he are trying to stir up, I need you to think about what it actually costs. Not just Roscoe, but me, and my daughter." "Your daughter," I repeated, keeping my voice carefully level. Something flickered across her face, gone as quickly as it came. "Yes, my daughter. Family doesn't turn on each other like this. Whatever happened between you and Roscoe, whatever you think you know, I'm still your sister. Are you? Don't do that." The softness vanished, replaced by a sharp edge. "Don't act like blood suddenly doesn't matter to you. I watched you smile through everything this family threw at you for years. Why does this matter now?" "Maybe because it was never supposed to be an exam I had to keep passing." She stared at me, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. I could see her recalculating, realizing the appeal wasn't working the way she hoped, looking for another angle. "You should be careful," she finally said, her voice dropping lower. "Don't assume you're the only one in this family holding on to things they shouldn't." I kept my face blank. "What does that mean?" "It means," she paused, studying me with the specific intensity you use when you aren't sure how much the other person knows. "You think you're the only one who kept things, all this time?" I didn't answer right away. I forced myself to stay perfectly still, the way I'd learned to sit at Ozetta's table for 7 years, giving nothing away. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said quietly. Clarissa watched me a beat longer. In that silence, I understood she wasn't confirming anything. She was fishing, throwing a stone into the water to see if it made a ripple. If she actually knew about the folder in my drawer, she wouldn't have asked it as a question. She would have said it plainly, the way people say things they are certain of. She didn't know for sure, but she suspected. And that alone told me more than she intended to. "Just think about what you're doing," she said, walking toward the door, "before it's too late to fix it." She left without waiting for a reply, the door clicking shut behind her. I stood there for a long time, her question replaying in my head. "You think you're the only one who kept things?" I walked into my office without thinking, standing over the desk drawer where the folder still sat. I hadn't touched it in days. I'd told myself it was as forgotten as it had always been. But standing there, I didn't entirely believe my own excuse anymore. The next morning, Emmett called before I'd even finished my coffee. "I have something to tell you," he said, "and I need you to sit down." "I'm sitting." I went back further than that group chat. I found a man named Otis Apprentice. About 3 years ago in Macon, he was with Clarissa. I didn't just hear his name, Vereen. I tracked him down, spoke to him directly. "Okay." She told him she was pregnant, told him it was his. He believed her. Started sending her money, doctor bills, nursery setup, expenses. He still has the bank transfers on his phone, Vereen. He showed me. Dates, amounts, months of it. Emmett paused. There was no baby. There never was. When he finally demanded to go to an appointment with her, she avoided him for 2 weeks and came back saying she'd miscarried. No hospital records, no doctor names when he asked. I let the information settle for a second, feeling something inside my chest grow hard instead of breaking. "This isn't the first time she's used a pregnancy to get something out of a man," Emmett said quietly. "He kept the transfers all this time because something in his gut told him it wasn't right. Roscoe wasn't just a partner in this. He was the next Mark, just like Otis." I thought back to the cookout years ago, the rim of her glass, her casual voice. As long as you don't correct them, you'd be surprised what people are willing to believe. It wasn't a joke. It had never been a joke. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "There's one more thing," Emmett said, his tone shifting from heavy to cautious. "Not about her, about you. What is it?" "Roscoe's lawyer contacted a mutual acquaintance trying to track down an old shared cloud account from your marriage. From what I gather, Roscoe was cleaning out files and requested a history of the document transfers. The logs show a folder of trust correspondence was downloaded to a device registered in your name years ago, and it was never uploaded back." My stomach dropped, cold and sudden. He told his attorney, Emmett continued. From what I understand, it wasn't even a suspicion at first. More of an annoyance, like he figured you just misplaced some of his things when the accounts split. But now, his lawyer wants to address it formally. I don't know what comes next. I just wanted you to hear it from me first. I thanked him again, my voice steadier than I felt. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The coffee in front of me had gone cold, and the pattern of Clarissa's behavior kept looping in my mind. Otis Apprentice. The money. The false pregnancy. The disappearing act. It was finally a matter of fact, not rumor. It confirmed the exact shape of the person my sister truly was, under the years of Ozetta's approval. I was still sitting there when the phone rang again. An unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but an instinct made me pick up. Ms. Prather, this is Dana Whitfield. I'm calling on behalf of legal counsel for Mr. Roscoe Windbush. Her voice was polite, professional, the kind of tone trained to give nothing away. We'd like to schedule a time to speak with you regarding certain documents you may have retained from the marriage without authorization. I sat perfectly still, the phone pressed to my ear, the cold coffee completely forgotten. I'm sorry, I said carefully. What documents? We can discuss the specifics when we meet, she said. What is your availability this week? The office was on the 14th floor of a downtown high-rise, all glass and quiet carpet, the kind of place designed to make you feel small before a word is even spoken. I sat on one side of a long table. Roscoe sat opposite me, right next to his attorney, a man in a sharp suit named Grady Pierce. I noticed Roscoe wouldn't look me in the eye at all. Ms. Prather, Pierce began, sliding a folder across the table. Not mine. A different, thinner document. Thank you for coming. We want to discuss some files that seem to be missing from the Windbush family trust records. Correspondence that was at one point backed up on a shared device you had access to during the marriage. I'm listening, I said, keeping my voice even despite my pulse. These documents are confidential trust materials, Pierce continued. They aren't marital property. Now, I'll be direct with you. Whether copies made at the request of your ex-husband himself constitute an unauthorized retention is an open question, and I won't pretend otherwise. But the family has a legitimate interest in knowing where those copies are and what they've been used for. I felt the room tighten around that word, unauthorized. Even with the qualification, it sat heavy in the room. At the very least, Pierce said, I'd advise returning what you have. I'm not here to threaten you with things I can't fully back up. I'm here because my client's mother deserves clarity. Frankly, so do you. Roscoe looked at me then, his expression completely devoid of any softness. This is what she does, he said, not entirely to me but to the room. Things don't go her way, and she starts digging into things that were never hers, sending her friend around to ask questions, holding on to files she has no business keeping. He shook his head. It's spite. I opened my mouth to answer, but for the first time since that day at Grady Memorial, I didn't have a quick response, because part of what he was saying was technically true. I had kept something that wasn't mine. I had let it sit in a drawer for years without giving it back. There was no version of tonight where I could claim complete innocence regarding the physical papers themselves. I'm not going to pretend I don't have old files from the marriage, I said carefully. 但我也从来没主动去翻找过任何东西。几年前我复印那些文件，是因为罗斯克让我这么做，为了我们自己的记录。直到最近，我都忘了他们的存在。That may well be true. Pierce's tone turned measured instead of accusatory. But the timing invites questions whether that's fair or not. I felt the ground slide slightly at the words. I could feel myself being repositioned in real time from the wronged party to the difficult one. I had no response. The silence stretched just long enough to feel like a defeat, and that was when Emmett, who had been sitting quietly beside me the entire time, spoke up. Since nobody else is going to say it plainly, I will. His voice was calm, but there was iron underneath it. I've known Roscoe since I was 19. In 15 years of friendship, I've never once challenged him publicly on anything. He looked directly at Pierce, then at Roscoe. The only reason I'm doing it now is because what's actually happening in this room is a man trying to cover his tracks by making the person who found them out look like a criminal. Roscoe's face went rigid. Emmett, he began. I mean it, Emmett said. Whatever it costs me in terms of a friendship, I'm not going to sit here and watch this happen without saying a word. 3 days after that meeting in the glass office downtown, Ozetta called the gathering herself. She didn't choose the house this time. She set it at the family lawyer's office, the man who had helped her manage her late husband's trust for the last decade. Neutral ground, she'd called it, though her voice on the phone had sounded anything but neutral. I came with Emmett. Roscoe came alone, his jaw tight with the specific look he always got when he sensed things weren't going his way. The lawyer, an older man who looked like he'd seen every version of a family coming apart, sat at the head of a long table. He had a folder in front of him, and I knew immediately that the weight it carried was far heavier than the one Grady Pierce had waved at me days before. This wasn't Roscoe's lawyer. This was a man who had sat across tables from Ozetta for 10 years. Whatever he said in this room today, he wasn't saying it for Roscoe's benefit. Ozetta requested that I formally confirm a matter, he began, in light of recent concerns raised regarding the timeline of the child's paternity and the trust's provisions for heirs. There's no need for anything formal, Roscoe said quickly. Mother, I've already told you. I know what you told me, Ozetta said, her voice carrying a coldness I'd never heard her use with her son. I've believed everything you told me for 34 years, Roscoe. That seems to be the exact problem. The lawyer continued, untroubled by the tension, the way men who make their living off other people's breakups always are. As a co-trustee, Ozetta has the right to request a formal verification before any further distributions under the heir clause can proceed. I've advised her to do so. The order for a paternity test isn't mine to give, or hers. It belongs to the court, but given the documentation presented, I don't see the petition being denied. This is ridiculous, Roscoe said. You're going to drag my daughter into a courtroom over a clause? The clause exists, the lawyer said calmly, because your father wanted certainty regarding bloodlines before handing over what he built. It was always going to require proof eventually. This just moves the timeline forward. I watched Roscoe's face as the weight of that statement landed. Whatever he'd told himself over the last few months about time passing and paperwork being enough to make a lie permanent, it was clearly unraveling right then. Once the court issues the order, the testing will proceed through the proper legal channels, the lawyer continued. The results will be sealed until they are officially delivered to all named parties. Until that time, all further distributions under that specific provision are frozen indefinitely. Ozetta didn't look at Roscoe while the lawyer spoke. She stared at her hands, folded tightly on the table in front of her, looking like a woman bracing herself against a heavy fact she hadn't yet been forced to bear. The meeting ended without a conclusion, just a process. The relentless machinery of an institution moving at its own pace, regardless of how much someone in the room was coming apart. We left separately. I didn't look back to see if Roscoe stayed with his mother. 2 days later, Emmett called to give me the second-hand news he'd gathered from someone still close enough to know. Roscoe had gone back to see Ozetta alone, trying one last angle before the tests came back. He told her it was a setup, that Vereen had never let go of the divorce, that Emmett was helping her spin a story out of malice and old feelings. The timeline confusion was just two bitter people trying to ruin what he'd built. Emmett said Ozetta hadn't argued. She just told him the results would speak for themselves soon enough, and she intended to listen to them. The results came back on a Tuesday, and Ozetta called everyone back to the same office where the order had first been discussed, as if the room itself had earned the right to hold the final conversation. She requested my presence specifically. Not as a courtesy, she'd said on the phone, but because after a year of carrying it alone, I had a right to hear it. The lawyer didn't waste time with introductions. He opened the folder and read the conclusion plainly. The child bears no biological relation to Roscoe Windbush. Nobody in the room looked surprised. That was the strange part. By then, the truth had already settled into everyone differently, and the paper was just making official what the expressions on everyone's faces had already confessed. Roscoe didn't argue. He sat perfectly still, staring at a spot on the table. Looking at him, I realized a part of him had been waiting for this moment all along, just to have the performance over with. Ozetta was the first to speak. 34 years, she said softly. Not to Roscoe, not really to any of us. 34 years of telling myself I knew what was best for this family, deciding who belonged at my table before anyone had a chance to earn the spot or lose it. She turned her eyes directly to me then. I was wrong about you. I was wrong for a long time. I let my preferences decide what was true instead of looking at who was actually standing next to me. I didn't say anything. Watching her arrive at that conclusion didn't bring me satisfaction, just a quiet late relief. Effective today, she continued, turning to the lawyer, "Roscoe's distributions under the heir clause are frozen indefinitely pending a full review of the fraud involved in triggering them." She paused. "And I want it formally recorded that Clarissa Prather is no longer welcome at any family gathering, on any family property, or in any further capacity regarding this trust." Roscoe finally looked up. "Mother, don't. You let me believe a lie for months because it was convenient for you," she said, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. "I don't need the explanation. I need you to understand that this is the cost." Before we left, the lawyer brought up the final item on the table, the files I had retained. He said the certified copies had been reviewed this week, confirming they had never been altered or shared or used for anything beyond what I'd stated. With the matter settled, I told him plainly that I'd be returning everything in my possession. Originals, copies, all of it. I didn't need the evidence anymore. The truth had done what it needed to do. The moment he took that folder from my hands and laid it down on the desk, a silent lightness lifted inside me. As for the child, she was too small to understand what her presence had caused or uncovered. Ozetta only said that whatever came next for the baby was between the courts and her mother, but that an innocent infant wouldn't pay for what the adults around her had done. The meeting ended the way most things of consequence do, quietly, with an exchange of papers, without shouting. Roscoe left first, entirely alone. I never asked what happened between him and Clarissa after that day, or if that marriage survived the weight of what had been uncovered. Standing in the hallway afterward, I realized I didn't need to know. Emmett walked out with me. We didn't say much in the elevator, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. "You okay?" he asked once we reached the parking garage. "I think so," I said, and for the first time in over a year, I actually meant it. I thought about Ozetta's face in that hospital hallway. So sure, so smug, telling me how much better everyone's life had become without me. I thought about how much of that certainty had been built on nothing at all, how favoritism had been mistaken for wisdom, and loyalty had been mistaken for love. A woman so certain of what she wanted to believe that she'd never stopped to ask if it was real. She had spent decades deciding who belonged in that family and who didn't, so confident in her own judgment that she'd never questioned it. Ozetta had spent a lifetime shutting me out, never realizing the two people she'd let in were the ones who truly didn't belong.